Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Nature at School webinar series. Really excited. We have Alan Wernett with us today from Ludington State Park, and we are going to discuss sea lamprey. Take it away, Alan.
All right. Thank you, Natalie. And thank you, everybody, for letting me come into your homes and schools and talk to you a little bit about the sea lamprey. The sea lamprey is an invasive species, and we could talk for hours on it, but I'm going to just give you some highlights of the sea lamprey, where it came from, what it's done to us. But before I do that, I do want to make sure that you can see me and you can see my camera there, my PowerPoint off to the side. I got some props in front of me that I will hold up in front of the camera for you to see as we go along too. And so let's jump right in. I am the park interpreter at Ludington State Park, and show me hands. How many of you have actually been to Ludington State Park? It is the queen of Michigan State Parks. As you can see, it's on Lake Michigan. We have camping here, we have sandy beaches, rivers, we have almost everything you can think of. That's why we're so popular, and I hope that you will come up and visit me and visit the park and enjoy the park here. So I'm going to jump right in here. Aquatic invasive species that I'm going to talk about today, and I'm going to emphasize the sea lamprey. But before I get right into the sea lamprey, need to talk just a little bit about the invasive species, aquatic invasive species. Basically, it's an organism that shouldn't be living here, but it's living here. Okay, something that got here either unintentionally or intentionally. Okay, and we'll talk about shipping and how that's unintentional, and then we talk a little bit about intentional things, like the I won't be talking about it, but you've heard a lot about the Asian carp. And this happens to be a life-size cutout of an Asian carp that we don't want in the Great Lakes. They eat the bottom of the food chain and affect our native species. And so that was one of the species that people actually brought here thinking they were doing something good, and it kind of got out of hand, got away from them, and it's actually done a lot of bad things for our native aquatic animals, aquatic fish. Sometimes people take their goldfish and they get tired of it when it's still alive and they flush it down the toilet. That's not a good thing to do for the fish, of course, but it's also not a good thing because sometimes they make their way into our rivers and streams, and goldfish aren't supposed to be here. And sometimes they flourish in our streams. And again, they're eating parts of the food chain that our native animals need. So looking at it, we have the food pyramid, okay? And an invasive species comes in and it upsets the food pyramid. It's like someone coming into your house and stealing your food, and then you don't have anything, okay? It's almost the same idea. Something comes in and is affecting that part of the food chain, eating that part of the food chain up. So the things higher up on the food chain don't get that food that they need, and their population starts to go way down. And that's what happens when we get invasive species, aquatic invasive species. Here's a good example. In the 1940s, we had a pretty good food pyramid for perch and walleyes. So we had a pretty good pyramid. Well, by the 1950s and even in the 1960s, we accidentally introduced some invasive species like the sea lamprey and also the alewives into the Great Lakes. And when they got into the Great Lakes, they broke the food pyramid, as the graph shows there. They broke it, and it kind of went crazy for a while until we got some kind of control. Our fishery biologists worked really hard, many, many years, to control those invasive species. And finally, by the late 70s, 80s, we started to get our food pyramid back together. So that's kind of what happens when we get invasive species in. It breaks that food pyramid, which affects all the natural things, native things that we have. This is a kind of funny cartoon that I use to show invasive species effects. Of course, there's nothing going to reach up and grab a boat and threaten to eat you like this. It's just a funny sketch. But on the outsides of that, you'll see some pictures of different kinds of invasive species. And I have one right here that I'm holding up here. In the sun, I won't get it too close because there's sun right there. But this is zebra mussels. And zebra mussels, these were found along the beach here at Ludington State Park. We're not the only place you'll find them. They're pretty common on inland lakes too. The zebra mussel, it's an invasive species, got into the Great Lakes, got into our rivers, got into our inland lakes. And what they do is they eat a lot of the little things. They filter out the food at the bottom of the food chain, which affects everything above it. And they got to be really, really bad at one time that they caused the population of our fish to go down, which made fishing not as fun anymore, not as able to catch as many fish, but also these wash up on the beach and they're sharp and you step on them. So that's an example. And there's other ones there, the gobies here at Ludington State Park. We are dealing with the goby problem because there's so many gobies in the river here now that our native perch population has dropped way down because the gobies have eaten so much of their food, and the gobies also eat the eggs of the perch. So they're a nasty problem we have here. They got into the waterways. And then we have plants, certain plants like the water milfoil that is so thick that it gums up our waterways, makes it hard for even the native animals to get through waterways. And then the little spiny water flea that you see down at the bottom. Well, who in the right mind, what kind of fish in the right mind wants to eat something that has spines on it? And of course it has to eat too, so it's eating up things. So that's an example there. I'm going to show you a little video here, and it's courtesy of Great Lakes Now. And okay, so this is off a TV show. It's on public television. You can go to YouTube and you can see these whole variety of Great Lakes Now episodes. So I'm going to steal a little bit from one of their episodes on invasive species. So let's watch that.
More than 180 invasive species have entered the Great Lakes. Zebra mussels and round goby arrived in the lakes more than 30 years ago, and the lakes are still adapting to the change.
3 of the best-known invasive species in the Great Lakes arrived from the same place. Zebra mussels, quagga mussels, and round gobies all came here from halfway across the world, carried in ballast water by ocean-going freighters.
Well, I'm going to stop that there and move on. I encourage all of you to sometime, again, go to those episodes. They're on YouTube. They're on public television. They're little segments, about 15, 20 minutes long. Excellent segments that talk about different things on the Great Lakes, and that one goes into more depth into the invasive species. But I don't want to consume my whole time having you watch a video that you can actually go to and see on YouTube. Sea lamprey. So we're going to talk about sea lamprey now. Sea lampreys are the true vampire fish. What do we mean by that? As you can see in the lower corner, they have these teeth, rows of teeth. Now, I don't have any live sea lamprey. Normally I do, but because of the COVID pandemic, I wasn't able to get live sea lamprey. And normally I would have a pail of ice water here with sea lamprey in it, and I'd pull it out and it'd be squiggling in my hand and showing it. So I'm going to take this fake one and make it squiggle, but it's not the same. Okay, sea lamprey are real slimy. This fake one's not slimy. They're usually really, really slimy. You got to wear a glove to hang on to them. But the sea lamprey has rows of teeth, and this doesn't show it quite as well as the picture does there. And they don't have jaws, so they're not eels. That's the number one thing people say when they come and see my sea lampreys, live ones. They'll say, look at the eels. And I'd say, folks, they're not eels. And I explain the difference between the eel and the sea lamprey. But basically, eels have jaws like you and I. We have a lower jaw, upper jaw, and we chew like that. Sea lamprey only has a round mouth sucking part, and it has teeth in there. They don't chew with those teeth. They actually grind away, and they grind away at the side of a fish. And you can see that one fish the guy's holding has a big sore on the side there. And that's what they grind. They grind the scales off the fish until the fish bleeds. Like if you and I did this over and over and over, eventually we take enough skin off, we start to bleed. Well, they're grinding away at the side of the fish till it bleeds. And then they start sucking that blood out. Okay, so they are true vampires. And this is one of my fellow interpreters. This is Shayna down at Wolf Lake Fish Hatchery. And Shayna was kind enough to send me a video that she made of a live sea lamprey. And she's holding it with her glove, and she sticks it to a piece of clear glass so you can actually see it moving its mouth and everything. So it's only a few seconds here. So let's see this, what Shayna has here. It's really, really neat. And usually I would do this myself. But again, I don't have any live sea lamprey this year right now to show you. But you can see that thing in the middle, that's its tongue that keeps going in and out. And on the end of its tongue, it has teeth. Could you imagine having teeth on the end of your tongue? I don't think we'd want that. So again, I thank Shayna for this because this is the coolest part of the lamprey program. When I do a lamprey program for groups that come here live and I have live sea lamprey, this is the coolest thing to see this sea lamprey stuck to this glass. All right. Thank you, Shayna. So let's move on here. Sea lamprey. Sea lamprey are native to the North Atlantic, North Pacific. They're basically the cooler parts of the oceans of the world are where sea lamprey naturally live. That's where they live. This brown area on this map here shows the coast of the United States there. It shows the East Coast. And that's naturally where they would live, okay? And they have predators. They have things that will control their numbers. But unfortunately, the sea lamprey has got into the freshwater Great Lakes, and they have adapted instantly to freshwater, from saltwater to freshwater. No problem for them to adapt. And they've got into our Great Lakes and spread, and there's nothing here that wants to eat them. Nothing here that wants to eat those things, those nasty little things. And of course, they're eating our native big fish, and we don't like that. So the sea lamprey's got in. Now, this other graph here shows the level of the Great Lakes. Lake Superior is up here, and Lake Michigan, Lake Huron down here, Lake Erie here, and Lake Ontario, Niagara Falls, all the way to the ocean. Okay? What I'm trying to show you there is nature had built a barrier to keep the sea lampreys from coming into the Great Lakes. But humans, we wanted to have a way we can get a boat from the Great Lakes into the ocean and a boat from the ocean to the Great Lakes. So we had to get around those barriers. And what did we do as humans? We built canals and locks that help the ship to get around and go up, go to the next level, go to the next level. So we built, and guess what? As ships come in from the ocean, guess what's following them right with them? Well, the sea lamprey. It's coming right behind them. And then like they come in here into the Great Lakes and it's like a buffet. All the food they want to eat, nothing that's going to hurt them here. And their population just went way, way up. And here's an example right here. Famous Niagara Falls, 4 of the Great Lakes. The water of 4 of the Great Lakes goes over this cliff. Niagara Falls, beautiful area. There's no way, absolutely no way, a sea lamprey could get up over Niagara Falls, okay? And that was a barrier for a long time, for as long as the Great Lakes have been here, until we wanted to get ships in, and then we built the canals and locks, and that's how they got into the Great Lakes. All right, fairly simple there how that happened. Now let's look at the life cycle of the sea lamprey. It has a pretty unique life cycle, and I got a bunch of little jars here full of life cycles here. So let's start with we got a circle and we have 4 slices, okay, and they're all numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. See that? So we'll start with slice number 1, which is the spawning adult. Okay, it's the adult that is spawning, and we're going to come around and talk more about that spawning adult. But right now, it's the adult the female's going to lay the eggs, the male's going to lay the sperm. That's going to fertilize, and we got voila, we got young. Okay, so this is a jar. You can see it, this jar, and there's all these little dots in here. There's actually several thousands of them in here. And what we have here is a jar full of eggs, actually thousands and thousands of little eggs in here, and they're all sea lampreys from one female. One female lays over 1,000 eggs, okay? Now, it's kind of obvious that not all 1,000 are going to survive. But if 50 survive, just think, that's 10 more sea lamprey than the one who laid the eggs. And so the population can grow real fast. So if 10 or 50 of these eggs survive to become adults, that's a lot of sea lamprey one sea lamprey can reproduce. So this is the eggs of a sea lamprey, okay? Now the sea lamprey, the female, she comes up the river about this time of the year, in the springtime. It's springtime right now here. In this time of the year, when the waters of the rivers are running cold, the female will come out of the deep, cold waters of Lake Michigan, come up the river, come up the stream, find a shallow area where there's some little rocks or maybe some sand, and she'll deposit her eggs. And then she'll go off and die, okay? Once she has spawned, she'll die, and I'll explain to that later when we get all the way around the circle here, okay? The male then follows a trail. She's left a trail up the river and the stream, and her trail is like a perfume. Think of it like perfume. We call it pheromones, okay? She's laying this trail in the water, and these males smell that, and they follow that trail. Now, when they come up to where the eggs are, she's already gone. She's gone. She's already put the eggs down and gone. So they get to that end of that trail, and they deposit their sperm, which then sinks to the bottom, mixes with the eggs, and the eggs are fertilized. And then guess what? Then the male goes off, and he dies too, okay? I feel funny doing this, but I don't have a live sea lamprey to show you. So again, I'll use this fake one here. That works out pretty good. So now the eggs are fertilized, okay? So now we're going to go to the second pie, and that one is the larva, the second wedge in the pie. That's the larva. And this, if you can see it, maybe I can get it closer. There you go. You can see it in the camera. Those are little sea lamprey larvae that have hatched out not too long ago. Now, they're not alive anymore in this jar. They're in a preservative here, but that shows you what they look like when they first hatch out. And guess, they're living in the streams, the shallow parts of rivers and streams. That's where they live as a larva, okay? Now, you look at that graph again in that second pie, and you can see it shows these creatures half buried in the mud, and they're kind of like this with their mouth open. And what happens, of course, their mouth is always open because it's round, but what happens is the water from the stream and rivers carrying little minute particles, and the water goes in its mouth, through its body, and their body sorts out those little particles, and that's their food, okay? So they're eating that little microscopic food that goes through them. They're filter feeders at this point of stage. Now, I always tell people, when you see these, and I have some right here in this jar right here, when you see these little guys, not much bigger than my finger, see that? Not much bigger than my finger. When you see these little guys in a river, you're walking bare feet in the summer in the river, and you stir up a little area with your feet, and you see these guys swimming all around. These are not leeches. They're not leeches. The first people think, oh gosh, they're leeches. They're going to attach to me and suck the blood out of me. They're not leeches, okay? Not at all. Leeches are a whole different aquatic organism. Leeches are actually natural. They're good. But the little lamprey here, the little sea lamprey here, are not leeches. They're not going to attach to you. They don't have the ability to suck blood at this stage of their life. They're filter feeders. They don't have teeth in their mouth yet, and they don't have a strong sucking mouth part yet. So they don't have any of that. So they're filter feeders. They might swim around your feet and then go back in the mud. They're not going to attach to you like a leech would, okay? So we're going to leave pie number 2, move to pie number 3, the section of the pie number 3 called Metamorphosis. And Metamorphosis is when those little creatures, filter feeders, all of a sudden their body changes, okay? Their body is going through a transformation. Their body's changing. First of all, they start to grow teeth, those rows of teeth that you saw in the mouth, and their tongue has teeth on it, starts to grow. Then their round mouth part starts to be able to get stronger and stronger, develop a very strong sucking mouth part. And the last thing that happens is their body no longer likes warm water because they're in the river and the streams, and they don't really, when they get to that metamorphosis stage, their body says, the heck with this. I don't want that warm water. I want cold water. I can't stand warm water anymore. Now, you and I, when we take a bath or shower, the last thing we want to do is turn it on super cold. It feels much better when it's warm, right? Well, they're going the opposite way. They're turning the water to cold. So they want to go to cold water. So they leave at this stage, the metamorphosis stage, which is a very short period of their life. They swim out of the rivers and stream into the Great Lakes, okay? And when they get to the Great Lakes, they don't stop at the shoreline, okay? I want you to remember that. They don't stop at the shoreline. They actually continue swimming miles out into the Great Lakes, and then they swim down 200, 300, 400 feet down into the Great Lakes, okay? In the dark, deep, cold parts of the Great Lakes. And down there, guess what they're going to find? They're going to find fish. And when they find a fish down there, and I'm just going to use this guy, just pretend he's a native fish. And they come down there and they find a fish. They stick to the side of that fish. And as they stick to the side of the fish with their sucking mouth part, their teeth underneath is grinding and grinding through the scales till the fish starts to bleed. And then they start sucking the blood out of the fish. All the time the fish is swimming. Now, that's where they do the damage. That's where they're really bad for us at that point of their life. Because one lamprey this size can consume in its lifetime 40 pounds of fish. And a fish, a big salmon, people catch these big salmon, they're averaging 20, 25, 30, 35 pounds in a big fish. Well, these guys can consume up to 40 pounds of fish in their lifetime. Now, if it has one of these, if a fish has one of these on it, not a big deal. But if a fish has 2 or 3 on it, that's a lot of body fluid to lose. And that fish will get weak and that fish likely will die. And that's where the problem is. Remember, one female can reproduce a whole bunch more and they all have to eat, right? So they're going to eat the blood. Now, I want to point out right here, right now, here at Ludington State Park in the summer, when I do this program down at my famous beach here at Ludington, the beach house, when there's thousands of people every day on a hot day, I'll do this program. I'll set up a table where people walk by me and I'll show them this and I'll talk a little bit about it. But one of the things I make sure is that the sea lamprey, make sure the people know that the sea lamprey is not going to hurt them and it's not going to hurt you directly. What do I mean by that? The sea lamprey likes to drink the blood of fish. Fish are cold-blooded. You and me are warm-blooded. They don't want anything to do with them. When I stick my hand into the big tank, normally in a normal year, to grab a bunch of live sea lamprey to bring back to the state park, when I reach my whole arm into that, the sea lamprey, there's hundreds in the tank, they just spread. They just, as fast as they can, get away from my arm because they don't want my blood. They sense my warm arm going in there and they don't want anything to do with it. So I have to run around with my arm until I catch one and then put it in ice water, okay? Because they like that cold, cold water. So they're not going to be along the shoreline and they're not going to swim up to you as you're having fun swimming in Lake Michigan or any of the Great Lakes and stick to you and start sucking your blood out, okay? You are warm-blooded. You and I like to swim in warm water and they don't like either of those things. So they're way out in the lake, way deep, feeding off the cold-blooded fish out there, okay? That's very important to remember. I'm one of the people that makes emphasis to that the sea lamprey, when I have a live sea lamprey, I do not stick it to myself, okay? If I take it and I force it, stay there, it will stay there and it will hang there. Does it want to be there? No, but I forced it to stay there. That's not a natural thing for them. So that's why Shayna had that plexiglass, and you stick it to the plexiglass because it's more of a feature that you would see. So I don't want to scare people. I'm not trying to scare people. These things aren't going to vampire on you, get your blood. They don't want anything to do with you. But they do hurt us by killing our big fish that we like to eat. So we're going to move up to the last part of the puzzle, or last part of the wedge here, of the pie, okay? That's number 4. That's called the parasitic juvenile stage. I kind of like to call it the adult stage, okay? I'm not sure why they don't call it an adult stage, because for me, it's an adult stage. They're this size or this big. They're eating off other fish, big fish. Now, they only live, I want to point out here, at that last pie, you'll see it says 12 to 18 months. So that's a year and a half. They only live as an adult like this for about a year and a half. That's it. If you go back and look down around the pie and you look down at the larva, number 2, you'll see they live 3 to 10 years or sometimes more as larvae, filter feeders. But at this stage, it's only a year and a half. So this is the time of their life that they don't live very long, but they do the most damage, okay? This is when they're doing the damage. All right, so this is what happens. They're feeding off the fish down in the deep. And then one time, all of a sudden, their body changes again. And this time, their digestive system, the food, the blood that they would have normally taken in from a fish, their digestive system, their stomach, intestines, it does this. It shrivels up. It just shrivels right up. Totally shrivels up. Not because they want it to happen, because it naturally happens. Their digestive system in their body shrivels up. Okay, that means they can't eat anymore because they don't have a stomach and intestines to eat anymore. So they're getting close to the end of their life. That's nature's way of telling them they're getting close to the end of their life. So what happens in that area where their stomach was, actually, the female lamprey, she uses that area to produce eggs. And remember, there's a lot of eggs in here. Yeah, there's a lot of eggs in there. See all those eggs? There's a lot of eggs. So she needs a lot of room in there for these eggs. And so she fills up that extra room that's gone now from the stomach. She fills it up with eggs. And then she starts her journey to the rivers. In the springtime, when it's cold, she starts her journey up the cold rivers and streams to lay the eggs down. Okay. And the male, he does the same thing. His digestive system collapses too, shrivels up, and he uses that area to produce the sperm, to put the sperm in there. Okay. So they exchange it. So that's when they get up there to the river and the stream. She lays the eggs, goes off and dies. He comes up, he puts the sperm down, fertilizes the egg. He goes off and dies. That's why they die. It's not because they can't make their way back. They just can't eat anymore. Their body won't let them eat anymore. Okay. And when you see some place like here at Ludington, when we have live sea lamprey, I have the sea lamprey at the end of their life. Okay. I have sea lamprey that can't eat anymore. And Shayna, the one you saw with the plexiglass, hers are the same way. Those, when you have live sea lamprey, when you see them on display somewhere, it's usually the spawning ones, the ones that are at the end of their life. So some people say, well, can you have it as a pet? Well, first of all, it's not a very good pet. It doesn't let you pet it. Number two, when you, the sea lamprey, when the sea lamprey is going in that stage, you don't want to have a pet that's going to die on you right away. Okay. So they don't last very long. So that's a little bit about sea lampreys in their life cycle. It's pretty interesting. In this slide here, I'm not going to read it. I'm not a slide reader, but it basically is some of the highlights that we've talked about now with the eggs, the female, the larva, how they live so long, they're filter feeders. In the metamorphosis, the juvenile stage, they develop teeth when they get to there. And we go through the pheromones as they go through. So let's move on to here. We're getting near the end here of the discussion of the program. But some people say, well, how do you get the sea lamprey? How do you get this guy? How do you get a live one? Well, you go to a research place where they're doing research on the sea lamprey. And what do? They go in the rivers this time of the year. They set traps in certain rivers, not all rivers, certain rivers they set traps in. And the sea lamprey will swim into the trap and they can't get out. And then from time to time, they'll take the sea lamprey and then they do research on them. They've done this for almost 60 years. And that's how we have figured out a way to control them. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So you see a couple traps there. Also, in the spring of the year, some rivers, not all rivers, they'll actually put a fence up. And you can actually see in that one picture, there's like a fence. And that causes the sea lamprey to come up to that fence. It's coming from the lake up, and it gets to that fence, and it can't get around. It can't get over. A sea lamprey, they say a sea lamprey can only jump as long as it is. So if the sea lamprey is this long, it can only jump this high. Okay, so if you put a fence up that's a couple inches higher than the length of the sea lamprey, they can't jump over it and continue their journey to lay the eggs. And if the female can't lay her eggs in a good spot, the eggs will never survive. And that's a goal, and that's worked out perfect. But we don't do that everywhere. Now, there's another picture here. It shows the Tequamanon River up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It has natural waterfalls. So the Tequamanon River, the sea lamprey can't get all the way up into the upper parts of the Tequamanon River because we have waterfalls that prevent that. And of course, fortunately, we don't have ships or boats that need to get around those waterfalls. So we don't have any man-made canals or locks to get around. So the Tequamanon River doesn't have near the problem because the upper parts, because the sea lamprey came through. So how do we control sea lamprey? Well, we have found out over decades and decades of research that the sea lamprey at this stage of life cannot be controlled at this stage of life. It's too late. So what do? We have learned to go back into their life cycle, back to the stage of the larva. I'm sorry, not the juvenile, the larva stage. So we go back to the stage, the larva stage. Let me stir these up a little bit. And at this stage of life, they are susceptible. They're easy to get to. First of all, they're in shallow rivers and streams. They're easy to find and get to, and they're susceptible to treating to actually kill them. And what we use, and if you see that slide, I've highlighted a word called lampricide. It's a special chemical that was found to kill the sea lamprey larva. If used right, it will only kill the sea lamprey larva, and it won't kill any of the native fish and things around it. And that's why in these pictures, I purposely show professional people doing a lot of research and being very careful where they put the lampricide. And I'm actually going to show you a video here. I think it's a really good video for showing that whole segment. So here we go.
In the depths of the Great Lakes is a scene reminiscent of a nightmare. Slimy, snake-like creatures with suction cup mouths lined with rings of sharp teeth and a rasping tongue prey on the trout, salmon, and whitefish that live in these lakes. Sea lampreys are the vampires of the deep.
Here's a good lamprey mark on this whitefish.
The effects of one of the most notorious of the Great Lakes invaders dates back to the 1950s, when the lamprey virtually wiped out the commercial and recreational fisheries in the Great Lakes.
A fish is seldom able to free itself from a mouth like this.
Since 4 out of the 5 Great Lakes straddle the U.S. and Canadian border, both governments are fighting these silent invaders with every weapon they've got.
Our battle is constant, and we can't let up.
One of the most important weapons in this battle is lampricide, a chemical deadly to the lamprey, but non-toxic to humans, other mammals, and fish. They attack while the lamprey is still in its vulnerable larva stage.
Without question, this is the most important program to the Great Lakes. Without this program, we could not make progress towards lake trout restoration.
Lampricide is highly effective in small streams like this, but the mother lode of spawning lamprey come from the St. Mary's River. Here, a yellow granular chemical called balucide is planted in the riverbed below. It causes the lamprey larva to emerge from the mud, ingest a super concentration of the toxic chemical, and die.
Anytime we can reduce the number of lampreys, it's going to help all species of fish.
But even before the spawning season begins, thousands of captured adult lamprey await their fate. This is where the males will be sterilized. One by one, tail first, the lamprey is sucked into the heart of a robotic machine. A biologically active chemosterilant called Bizazir is injected into its belly.
If there's 100 sterilized males in the river and 100 normal males in the river, females in the river have a 50-50 chance of mating with a sterilized animal, and so in effect we will reduce reproduction in the river by 50%.
The sea lamprey has lived in the ocean for nearly 300 million years. It entered the Great Lakes through man-made shipping canals. Anglers and commercial fishermen have been severely affected by its invasion. This $7 billion a year industry is protected by the efforts of governmental bodies to the tune of $20 million a year. Canada spends $8 million a year fighting this pest. It's your concern and tax dollars that keep our Great Lakes protected. So stay informed and stay involved in this daily battle with the silent invaders.
All right, so let's wrap this all up here. We've seen how damaging one of these invasive species called the sea lamprey is. I mentioned to you that it's not a commercial fish, that it is a primitive type of fish. It's not a fish that fishermen go out of the way to try to catch. It'd be pretty hard to catch one anyway, because they're not going to eat a worm or bait. They are attached to the side of a bigger fish. But it is a delicacy to eat these over in some other countries, such as England. In England, they actually see the sea lamprey as a delicacy to eat. Now, remember I said they're native to the North Atlantic. Well, the North Atlantic Ocean surrounds England, the British Isles. And so what's an interesting story is on Queen Elizabeth's 90th birthday, they actually made her a lamprey pie for her to eat as a specialty on her 90th birthday. Now I've talked to the people at the research station, Lamprey Research Station, and they've told me they've tried to cook one of these, eat these every which way you can, deep fry it, and they all tell me the same. They taste awful. They're not very good tasting. So I don't know what the taste buds are in England compared to here, but everybody I know around here doesn't want to eat one of these things. So again, they're an invasive species that not only hurts our other fish, but we don't want to eat them either. Lastly, are there native lamprey? Yes, they're not sea lamprey, they're native lampreys. I got one example right here. This is a northern brook lamprey. And this is a fully grown adult. And yes, it does suck the blood from larger fish, but it's only not that big. It's not very big. It's a native lamprey. It lives in rivers and lakes, inland lakes. It doesn't live in Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes. And so they have predators such as pike. Pike will eat them. Muskie will eat them. Okay. And so they have predators to control the numbers, and they have for thousands of years. Again, they're not sea lamprey. They're native lamprey, and there's 4 or 5 different kind of native lamprey, but they're all small. They're not very big, and they're not very common because there's natural controls on them. Unfortunately, those things that eat them won't eat the other things. So with that, I'm going to say, what can you do to help? We've gone through some of it. Be careful what you put in the water. If you're a fisherman and you use live bait, and I just saw this today on a DNR message that came through, they're finding zebra mussels, zebra mussels in some of the plants that are in fish shops, and they're warning people. So we don't throw live bait back into the water. We don't put it in the water, and any kind of plants that are with that bait or anything you get at a store, you don't put it in the natural water. Okay, that's the biggest thing you and I could do to keep invasives down. We also are asking people to clean their boats, and we're more and more trying to provide that service for fishermen. Clean their boats before you go. When you take your boat out of here, clean it before you put it in another river, another lake, because that's an easy way to transport invasives around too. And lastly, the United States and Canada work hand in hand and have for well over 60, 70 years to control invasive species, especially the lamprey. So it's a good thing to support continuing the funding for that. So I think the last slide is a big thank you for listening to my talk here. There's a lot more I'd like to tell you about lamprey, but time, I've already gone over my time, but time is a factor. So read more about it, learn more about it. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Natalie, if there's any questions anyone has, I'd be happy to answer them.
You did such a thorough job. What amused me, Alan, was the questions that came up were ones you actually answered in your presentation. People were really curious. It was great. They were curious about if the lamprey were going to bite them. You said, no, they don't like us. We're warm-blooded. They wanted to know how we control them. You answered that, obviously. So I just thought that was really neat that you answered it all. I learned a lot today. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you. Thank you. And everybody have a good day. Come visit, enjoy the Great Lakes.
Everybody who's out there watching today, remember to visit michigan.gov at Nature at School, and you can find recorded sessions of other Nature at School webinar series programs. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.